We've already cut off one of her fingers. Here's another story of mine from when I lived in Mexico City. This time, I myself am the protagonist. This happened when I was 18 years old, during the summer before I moved to the US for college. I spent that summer hanging out with my friends, partying, drinking, and the like. It was very fun. After one of those nights of heavy drinking, I woke up in my buddy's house at around noon and headed straight home. I had a pounding headache, and the sun's hard rays blurred my vision, dazzled me, as I got off the bus and walked the few blocks between the bus stop and my house. No one was home except our maid, Carmen. Maids are a lot cheaper, more common for middle-class families in Mexico. I entered and lied down on the first couch I saw. I started drifting into Morpheus's embrace when I was awoken up by the phone ringing. Carmen answered, and about a minute later came to give me the phone. I could see in her eyes that something was not right. Her hand was shaking as she handed me the handset. I think someone has the Senora, she said in a tiny voice. What? I said, incredulous as I put the phone to my ear. On the line was a woman screaming in agony. I couldn't understand what she was saying. She was mostly screaming and crying and sometimes about a finger, and all I could think was, fuck, they've got my mom. The woman's scream stopped, and suddenly a man was on the line who said in a threateningly calm voice, "We've got your mom. We've already cut off one of her fingers." At this point, my vision became all black with rage and anguish, and I started to lose my grip on reality. Do you guys have any idea how it feels to know that your mother, the woman who has been there for you all your life, is being tortured in some dark room somewhere in the largest city in the world? Hope you never find out. The man demanded money, and I did not have any. I frantically searched my parents' bedroom for a hidden stash of cash. Anything! The guy kept saying that he would kill her if I didn't have any, and I kept pleading and pleading to the man to wait until my father gets home. He has money! At that point, I was in tears, living some of the worst moments of my life, when all of a sudden, I heard the door of the house open, and with amazing relief, I heard the sweet, angelic voice of my mother. As she yelled at my dad to grab something from the car, I ran down and hugged her so hard. "What happened? How did you escape?" I yelled. The guy tried calling again, right away, but we just hung up. Turns out I was the victim of a scam that had been common in Mexico, where people would call random phones and pretend to have a kidnapped family member. They ask you to meet them somewhere immediately and bring cash for ransom, like they'll kill or keep torturing the victim until you give them what they want. A lot of people, like myself, get so freaked out and confused that they don't think it through and just end up giving away their cash. Late night walks in Mexico City. Apologies in advance for errors on my phone. This is not something that happened to me, but rather my father, a native of Mexico City. He has no reason to lie. As Mexico City being as diverse and as huge as it is, strange shit like this is expected. So my father is about 40 years old, and back when he was a teenager, he used to spend entire nights and mornings out with friends, as his parents did not care much for him. One morning at about 2, he is walking down this desolate street with his one friend when he leans over to my father and says, "Don't make it too obvious you're looking, but look over there." What his friend was referring to was simply a 50-gallon barrel in the distance, maybe about 200 yards away. My father looked and thought nothing of it, but upon further inspection, he noticed someone hiding behind it watching them. Now, my father is tough as bricks, being raised on the streets, so if this were to occur under any other circumstances not as odd as this, he probably would have confronted this person. But what was odd about this was that the person's eyes, described to be fully black. I rejected the possibility of these being colored contacts, as it was the mid-80s, and colored contacts were invented in the late 80s. Only reached a few inches above the gallon, and if it wasn't creepy enough, my dad described him to be dressed as a devil. He had horns and was red? At this point, my father says to his friend, "As soon as we pass him, haul ass." As they approach the gallon and past it, this devil man shifts his body around the gallon, still behind it, as if to keep his body and view facing them, if that makes sense. and as soon as they passed it, they haul ass out of there. My dad says they made it out safely, but I don't remember if the thing followed or not. It gives me chill to think that thing is still just lurking, waiting. The woman in a white nightgown. When I was 20 years old, I flew to Mexico to study abroad in the city of Guadalajara. Mexico isn't a common spot to study abroad, but I love the culture and was fascinated by ancient history of the place. The lure of adventure motivated many trips during my short 4 months. Towards the end of my time, my roommate and I decided to take a trip to the colonial town of Guanajuato. We boarded a bus to the city, winding north to the deserts and mountains of Mexico. Upon arriving, we were stunned by the beauty of Guanajuato. An old silver mining town, the architecture was rich and cobblestone lined the streets. Neither I nor she had stayed in a hostel before, and we thought this would be the perfect opportunity to add to the adventure. Upon arriving, we paid for 2 nights, then climbed the stairs and entered our room. The room was dorm style, with 6 bunk beds to accommodate 12 guests. When we arrived, a woman was standing at the window, staring out into the street. She wore loose, ragged blue jeans and a loose top. She turned and we introduced ourselves. She spoke in a mix of English and Spanish, rambling from topic to topic. She was here to sell her art. She made bookmarks and postcards. Her late husband left her, and she did it to support herself. She offered to show us the bookmarks, and we agreed. They were less than impressive, splattered paint on white stock paper and cruelly cut. She walked us through each piece, telling us the story of each image. When she got back around to the beginning, she told us a different story. I was intrigued by this woman. She was fascinating and obviously crazy. I bought a bookmark to give my creative writing professor. I knew she would share my interest in her character. My roommate and I excused ourselves from the woman to find a place to eat. We left her in the room to sort through her art. After our meal and a quick stroll through town, we returned to the hostel. The woman was not there. Exhausted, we changed and went to bed. We both woke up when she first returned. She threw the door open, stomped in, and rummaged loudly through her things. I rolled over and tried to ignore her. In addition to her loud disturbances, the street below us was loud with cars and drunk pedestrians. I finally fell into a restless sleep, incorporating the noise into my dreams. It was only 2 hours before I awoke again. Sleepy, I rolled over. Opening my eyes, I froze. The woman sat facing us, her legs crossed, her eyes loud, wide open. She was wearing a long white nightgown. She didn't move. Terrified, I threw off my covers and stumbled to the bathroom. She didn't move or respond to my sudden retreat from that room. She just kept staring. After catching my breath, I towed back into the bedroom. She was curled up on her bunk as if nothing happened. I crawled back into the bed and barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, she was gone. Went downstairs for breakfast, where the hostel owner approached us. She asked us if the woman was bothering us. I replied yes, explaining what had happened. The owner frowned and told us she had bothered other guests as well. She would not be allowed back. The rest of our trip was uneventful. But I still wonder about that woman. What would have happened if we had to spend another night with her? Not my family trip. Excuse the formatting, currently on my phone. This was a story of a friend of mine. I'll write it as if he were telling it. We went on a family trip, visiting family in Texas on our way down to Mexico to see more family. It was me, my brother, and my parents in one car, and more family members in a car in front of us. We reached Mexico, and as we were driving down a road, we noticed a truck following us and an SUV behind it. Obviously more people than it could fit. The SUV passes the truck and gets in front of us. We ignore it. The SUV then passes our family's car in front of us. Suddenly, they stopped. We were boxed in. About 8 men total get out from both cars and approach us. I think to myself, oh fuck. They have guns. They tell us they were the cartel and ordered us to give up our belongings. With guns, what the hell do you do? We give everything up and everyone is shooken. We stand outside of our cars baffled at what just happened. Glad to still be alive. We collect our emotions and go on driving. Everyone is quiet. We drive for another 15 minutes until we're stopped once again by another SUV. Same emotions come back to us. This time, we were sure we were going to die. One man gets out, other men in the car visible with their guns. Some had masks. He approaches us and asks us if we had seen another SUV and truck describing the first encounter. My dad nervously says, "They took our belongings not too long ago," and pointed to the direction the people went. The man calmly says, "Wait here," and goes back to the SUV and they leave. We think to ourselves, let's go now before they come back and kill us. We decide to wait since we've easily been found. If we were to die, it was going to be tonight. Not 20 minutes later, which felt like 5, the second SUV comes back. They tell us to get out. Oh shit. They open the back of the SUV, revealing decapitated heads. They asked us if these were the men that stole our belongings, and we slowly nod our heads. They told us the men were portraying the cartels, pure imposters, that they were the cartels. Then, they just leave. We look at each other, wondering what in the world just happened. We get in our cars and less than a mile later, find our belongings out on the road. I could have been murdered. 5 years ago, my mother and I planned a trip to Mexico for my birthday. She and I had gone to Mexico many times before, but we usually took a taxi from the airport in Mexico City, straight to the bus station, and took a long bus ride into the town my family lives in. This time around, my mom was feeling a little more adventurous. We had never really explored around Mexico City, so when we got off the plane, we got a taxi into town. We had gotten out in town and wandered around a bit, when we decided it might be a good idea to just find a hotel for the night, in order to be able to see the town completely. We flagged down a passing taxi and put our bags in the car. My mom was making small talk with a cab driver, telling him we were looking for a hotel, that we had just gone in from the US, that we wanted to see the city. He had made a comment that we were pretty. The taxi driver then said something about how the city can be dangerous. I thought nothing of the comment, but he kept talking. I got a strange feeling that something was off about this man. The man went on to say that he once had a run-in with a taxi driver who had abducted a young girl. At this point, this weird feeling grew stronger and stronger. While looking out the window, I had noticed that we were going in a giant circle. He continued with a story that the girl was tied up in the back of the car on the floor. By that second, my heart felt like it was about to jump out of my chest and it was pounding so hard, but I tried to keep my cool. I told my mom I had to go to the bathroom or something along those lines so we could get out. She told me to wait until we got to the hotel or something. The taxi driver had been continuing with his story, how he ended up calling the cops and had saved the girl from the guy who had tied her up in the back of the car. I started yelling at my mom that I wanted to get out of the car. She finally listened and told the driver to let us out. We had ended up in the same place where we had found the taxi. We got out and I looked at my mom. I asked her if she was listening to the man's story. She thought nothing of the story though. I explained to her that the man in the taxi couldn't have seen the girl who was abducted and tied up in another taxi if she was on the floor. He wouldn't have been able to see her. The man had been telling us things that just sounded off about the story that couldn't have been seen unless you were there while the girl was in the car. She finally understood what I was getting at. We looked at each other horrified by what we had just experienced. The man could have easily kidnapped us and killed us. Thankfully, we weren't kidnapped or anything. But from then on, I don't want to go back to Mexico City. College trip to Mexico gets weird fast. First time post. Hopefully it measures up to the other good stories I read on here. This happened when I was a freshman in college around 2005. The Mexican border was considered sketchy at the time, but I heard that it was safe to go to Progreso, as opposed to places like Juarez. At the time, I went to college in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was about 19 years old and decided to drive 3 hours to Mexico with my guy roommate Ryan, who was the same age as me, and our girlfriends on a Sunday night. We wanted to eat real Mexican food, get some beers, explore, and whatever else you might do in Mexico. Probably a terrible idea. We were both clean-cut, generic-looking white dudes with 18-year-old blonde girlfriends. Basically, we stuck out like a sore thumb in Mexico. When we all arrived at the border crossing to Progreso, there's a parking lot you can park in and walk across the border. At the time, you didn't need a passport. You just show your license and walk across. As we are talking to the border agent and showing our IDs, he gives us a very concerned, stern look, the way a parent would look at their children, knowing they are about to make a stupid decision. Very seriously, he asked us what we plan to do. After we tell him, he just pauses and says, "Please, be very, very careful." I felt a tinge in my stomach, but brushed it off and kept walking across a large metal bridge that was illuminated by high-powered lamps. As soon as we crossed the border, it's a totally different world. Streets were dirty, not paved, not well lit. People were loitering around in the corners and in the shadows, selling things on the street, etc. We walked about 100 yards in and are immediately greeted by some stranger on the street. The man is a late 30s, muscular, stocky, with a heavy Spanish accent, but can speak broken English. He's very chatty and wants to be our new best friend. He claims he knows the best restaurants, the best bars, and can show us a good time. I am immediately creeped out by this guy, but nobody else in our group is getting bad vibes at this point. He just seems overtly friendly and very eager to help us. Note, this kind of behavior set off alarm bells when I travel now. He follows our group to a local restaurant where we all sit down to order. As we eat, he talks a lot and begins to dominate the conversation. He is very overbearing and becomes more insistent on showing us around and starts trying to make plans for what we should do this evening. Everyone in the group is starting to get uncomfortable. He gets up to go to the restroom after we pay. When he leaves the table, I tell Ryan and the girls I think we need to lose this guy, and everyone agrees at this point. While our new best friend is in the restroom, I'm thinking this is our perfect opportunity to duck unnoticed. Then, the waiter comes over in a hushed voice in broken English, and she points to the bathroom and says, "That man, no good man, no good man." Now everybody is freaked out. We've already paid, so we all get up in a rush to leave, so we can ditch this guy. As we're walking out the door, he comes out of the bathroom and runs out to catch up with us. At this point, his demeanor changes dramatically. He is no longer laughing or joking or in a good mood at all. He seemed genuinely irritated. We tried to ditch him. Now he is very insistent that we follow him to the best bar in town. I don't know why, but we're all scared, so we're kind of trailing behind him down this main street looking at each other like, what the fuck should we do? Periodically, he would run to the other side of the street and mutter something to the Mexican police in Spanish. These guys had shirts that said police, but they were wearing baggy clothes with pistols tucked in their waistlines, smoking cigarettes on the street corner. Definitely did not look like legit cops, and we're all starting to feel like this is going from bad to worse. By this time, everybody on the street just stops and stares at us as we walk by. Everything about the situation just felt so wrong. Then this guy pulls out a cigarette and starts smoking it, except it's not lit. He continued to smoke it without lighting it. What the F? I feel like the leader of our friend group because this guy is mostly conversing with me, while Ryan and the girls have become quiet and are just sort of following me, not really knowing what to do. I am mentally keeping track of how far we have walked from the border crossing. I keep looking back, and I see the lights from the bridge getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The final straw is when we get to a side street that leads to an empty parking lot. In the parking lot, I can see a van parked by itself. He insists this bar is just a little farther down the side street. I could feel my heart start pounding and my face flushing. I snapped and said hell no. We weren't going any farther and that we were going back to the US. I looked at my friends and told them to start walking back towards the light. We start walking away with this guy getting visibly more angry by the second. We all start to pick up the pace until we are just sprinting towards the border bridge. This guy is following us and screaming until we get back to the bridge. He sort of fell back and then just disappeared into the streets again. I think once we got close enough to the border agents, he just gave up following us. We had only been there for a total of maybe 2 hours, but I had had my fill of Mexico fun. We were so glad to be back in the US, driving home. In the car on the way back, everyone was kinda giddy with nervous laughter, as it kinda sank in that we narrowly dodged getting abducted in Mexico.